make sense in a single framework. You can sit with, I don't know, and feel solid in it. You can hold two contradictory understandings of the same experience and feel enriched by the complexity rather than threatened by it. People who haven't been through this process often find this disorienting. They want you to pick a side. Were your parents good or bad? Was your past relationship healthy or toxic? Are you doing well or struggling? And you find yourself saying both, and meaning it genuinely without evasion. The either-or thinking that dominates most people's experience of reality has given way to something broader. The fourth sign is a shift in how you relate to solitude. In Rubedo, solitude often feels forced on you. You're isolated because your old world has collapsed and you don't fit anywhere. In Rubedo, solitude becomes intentional. You choose it because you need space to do the work, to sort through the debris, to rebuild without external interference. Both of those are solitude in service of something. There's a purpose to it, a direction. In Rubedo, solitude just becomes part of the texture of your life. You're not retreating from anything. You're not protecting yourself from the world's energy. You're simply someone who requires substantial time alone, and you've stopped apologizing for it or treating it as a phase you'll eventually outgrow. The alone time isn't heavy anymore. It has a quality of spaciousness, of genuine enjoyment, of quiet aliveness. You might spend an entire afternoon doing very little and feel deeply nourished by it. You might go days without craving social contact and feel perfectly well. But, and this is the key marker, you're equally capable of deep, genuine engagement with others when you choose it. People in Rubedo don't hide from connection. They're selective about it. They can walk into a room and be fully present, warm, interested, alive, and then leave, and be equally content alone. The old pull between isolation and enmeshment has resolved into something more like a dial. They can adjust based on what's real in the moment. Jung noticed that his patients in this stage often described their social lives as smaller, but immeasurably richer. Fewer relationships, but each one characterized by a depth and honesty that wasn't possible before. The old habit of collecting people who needed them, or surrounding themselves with others to avoid facing their own inner landscape, all of that had fallen away. What remained was chosen. What remained was real. The fifth sign of Rubedo is perhaps the most visible from the outside, even though the person experiencing it often doesn't notice at first. You stop trying to change people, fully, completely, in a way that isn't resignation or defeat, but something closer to genuine respect for where each person is in their own process. If you've spent much of your life in the helper role, seeing people's wounds, intuiting what they need, working to facilitate their growth whether they asked for it or not, this shift feels tectonic. The compulsion simply isn't there anymore. You can sit with someone who's making choices you can see will cause them pain, and you feel something you might not have expected. Peace. Because you've learned through your own process that growth can't be imposed from outside. That people change when the internal pressure to change becomes greater than the comfort of staying the same. That all the clarity in the world offered at the wrong time is just noise. This connects to something Jung observed about the fundamental nature of Rubedo. The earlier stages are characterized by a kind of internal warfare. The ego fighting the shadow, the conscious self wrestling with the unconscious, the old identity resisting its own dissolution. In Rubedo, the war ends, and when the war inside you ends, you stop unconsciously waging war on others' unconsciousness. You stop needing them to see what you see. You stop carrying the burden of everyone else's growth. You just let people be. And paradoxically, this is when your presence becomes most transformative to others. Jung documented that people in genuine Rubedo had an almost gravitational effect on those surround them. But the effect came from their being, not their doing. They weren't trying to heal anyone. They weren't offering unsolicited wisdom. They were just existing as someone fully integrated, fully present, fully themselves. And that wholeness, just by proximity, seemed to give others permission to start their own process, or not. Either way was fine. The sixth sign of Rubedo involves your relationship to the past, and it's one of the subtlest shifts, but also one of the most profound. In earlier stages of the work, the past is a construction site. You're excavating memories, re-examining childhood dynamics, uncovering the origins of your patterns, feeling the unfelt feelings from decades ago. The past is alive and demanding, and takes up enormous psychological bandwidth. It needs to. That's the work. In Rubedo, the past settles. It doesn't disappear. You're not repressing or spiritually bypassing your history. You can still access memories of what happened to you. You still carry the understanding of how those experiences shaped you, but the charge is different. The memories are there without the gravitational pull. You can tell the story of your childhood without your nervous system activating as if it's spedantly. You can think about the person who hurt you most without spiraling into rage or grief. The past has become genuinely past, integrated into who you are, informing your choices, but no longer running the show. Jung described this as the completion of the integration process. The shadow material from your history has been brought into consciousness, examined, felt, and absorbed into the larger structure of your psyche. It's no longer split off and running as an autonomous complex. It's been metabolized, and when something has been truly metabolized, it becomes part of your strength rather than the source of your reactivity. People in Rubedo often describe a strange experience of looking back at their life and feeling a kind of coherence they couldn't see while living it. The painful experiences, the seemingly pointless suffering, the relationships that devastated them, all of it reveals itself as part of a larger pattern of development. This isn't the toxic positivity of everything happens for a reason. It's something more nuanced. It's the recognition after the fact that the psyche was using everything, every wound, every failure, every dark night, as material for its own integration. You didn't suffer for a purpose exactly, but the suffering has been woven into something complete. The seventh sign is about desire, and it surprises people who've been on long spiritual paths. Your desires come back: physical desires, creative desires, ambition, appetite, wanting things, pursuing things, building things. After the ascetic quality of the deep work, after the years of turning inward, stripping away, letting go, there's a period in Rubedo where you wake up one morning and realize you want something, really want it, in your body, in your gut. And this is where Rubedo diverges from almost every spiritual framework that teaches desire is the enemy. Jung saw the return of desire in Rubedo as one of the most important markers of successful individuation, because the desires that return at this stage are fundamentally different from the desires that drove you before the process began. Before, desire was often compensatory. You wanted things because something was missing inside. You pursued achievement because you didn't feel inherently valuable. You sought relationships because you couldn't tolerate being alone with yourself. You accumulated because emptiness felt unbearable. The desires of Rubedo come from a different place. They come from fullness rather than lack. You want to create because something in you is overflowing and needs expression. You want connection because you genuinely enjoy people, not because you need them to regulate your emotional state. You want to build something in the world because you discovered what you actually care about, not what you were told to care about, not what earns approval, but the thing that rises from your authentic center and demands to be made real. Jung found this return of desire was often accompanied by a burst of creative energy that surprised people. Patients who'd been through years of deep psychological work, years that often felt like slogging through mud, would suddenly find themselves painting, writing, building businesses, starting gardens, renovating houses. The life force that had been directed inward for so long suddenly reversed direction and poured outward into the world. And it wasn't frantic or desperate. It had a quality of inevitability, like a river that had been dammed finally finding its natural course. The eighth sign involves how you handle other people's projections onto you. Before Rubedo, other people's opinions and perceptions tend to land with force. If someone misreads you, it stings. If someone projects their shadow onto you, calling you selfish when you set a boundary, calling you cold when you maintain distance, it can destabilize you for days. Even in albedo, when you have the intellectual understanding that these are projections, they still affect you. You know what's happening, but you feel it anyway. In Rubedo, projections start sliding off you with an ease that can be almost disorienting at first. Someone mischaracterizes your intentions, and you feel nothing much. A mild curiosity about what's driving their perception, maybe. But the hook that used to catch in your chest and pull you into defending yourself, explaining yourself, adjusting yourself, that hook finds nothing to catch on. Your sense of who you are has become so internally anchored that external misperception simply doesn't register as a threat. Jung connected this to the stabilization of the ego-self axis. In Rubedo, your ego has fully accepted its relationship to the larger self. It knows its place, necessary, functional, but not the center of the psyche. And because the ego is no longer inflated and fragile, it doesn't need constant external validation to maintain itself. You know who you are, you know where you've been, you know what you carry, and someone else's inability to see that clearly doesn't change any of it. This makes you remarkably easy to be around for people who are secure, and remarkably unsettling for people who aren't. Because when someone projects onto you and gets no reaction, no defensiveness, no explanation, no emotional charge, it mirrors back to them that they're projecting. And that mirror, held steadily and without aggression, is one of the most confronting things a person can encounter. The 9th sign of Rubedo is a changed relationship with mortality. This might sound dramatic, but Jung found it was one of the most consistent markers. People who've genuinely completed the individuation process develop a different orientation toward death. The existential anxiety that runs as a low hum beneath most human activity, the constant unconscious effort to avoid thinking about the fact that this all ends, quiets down. You start to hold your own mortality with something that isn't acceptance exactly, and certainly isn't eagerness, but more like familiarity. You've already been through a kind of death, several actually. The death of your false self in Negredo, the death of your illusions in Albedo, the death of your need to be special, to be right, to be in control. Each of those deaths prepared you in some way for the reality of physical death. And while you're in no rush, life in Rubedo is vivid and rich and deeply worth living. The terror has been replaced by something steadier, a recognition that endings are part of the structure of things and that your own ending will come, and that this awareness can coexist with full engagement in being alive. Jung wrote about this extensively in his later years. He believed that the second half of life, the period naturally oriented toward Rubedo if the work is done, should involve a conscious relationship with death. He saw Western culture's refusal to face mortality as one of its deepest pathologies, and he observed that individuals who achieved Rubedo carried an unusual equanimity about the subject. They could discuss death without flinching, without deflecting, without the performative courage that's really just disguised fear. They had genuinely metabolized the reality, and it had paradoxically made them more alive. The 10th sign is the one that ties all the others together, and it's the hardest to describe because it's more of a quality than a behavior. People in Rubedo have a specific kind of warmth. You've met someone like this, maybe rarely, maybe once in your life. They walk into a room and something changes in the atmosphere. They're fully present with you in conversation, and you feel it in your body. They laugh easily, and their laugh has a texture that makes you trust them before you know why. They can sit in silence without it becoming awkward. They touch people and animals and objects with a quality of attention that suggests everything matters to them equally. This warmth is the reddening that the alchemist described. It's the return of the fire, not the chaotic consuming fire of Negredo, but a sustained inner warmth that radiates outward without effort. Jung understood it as the natural consequence of integration. When you're no longer at war with parts of yourself, when you're no longer splitting your energy between performance and truth, when you're no longer defending against your own shadow, all that energy becomes available, and it expresses itself as a kind of aliveness that other people can feel. This is fundamentally different from charisma, which Jung understood as an ego function, the persona turned up to maximum appeal. Charismatic people draw you in through performance. People in Rubedo draw you in through presence. The distinction is felt instinctively. In the company of a charismatic person, you feel excited, entertained, perhaps slightly inadequate. In the company of someone in genuine Rubedo, you feel calmer, more real, more yourself. Their integration doesn't demand anything from you. It just reminds your psyche what integration feels like. There's a dimension to all of this that often goes unspoken, and I think it matters for anyone who recognizes themselves in what I'm describing. Rubedo can be lonely, not in the devastating way that Negredo is lonely, where you feel cut off from the world and abandoned by reality itself, and not in the purposeful way that Albedo is lonely, where you're deliberately making space for the work. Rubedo's loneliness is quieter, more structural. You've arrived somewhere that very few people have been, and the landscape is gorgeous, but sparsely populated. You look around for others who've been through it, and they're rare. You try to describe what you're experiencing and the language feels inadequate. Or worse, it sounds like the same spiritual cliches that you now know are usually spoken by people still in early stages, borrowing the vocabulary of completion without having done the work. You've outgrown the communities that supported you through Negredo and Albedo, because those communities are organized around the struggle, and you're no longer struggling in the same way. You don't need the constant processing, the shared language of wounds, the mutual validation of difficulty. You just need someone who looks at you and knows. Jung acknowledged this. He wrote about the fundamental solitude of the individuated person, the recognition that wholeness doesn't come with a social reward. You don't get a medal. You don't get a community of peers waiting to congratulate you. You get yourself, fully, and for a long time, that has to be enough. But he also observed that people in Rubedo tend to find each other eventually. The relationships that form at this stage have an unusual quality, almost effortless depth, a recognition that bypasses the usual slow process of building trust. When someone who's been through genuine Rubedo meets another, there's a resonance that's immediate and unmistakable. You don't have to explain your history. You don't have to prove that your experience is real. You just feel the warmth of another fire burning at the same frequency. And the loneliness eases, not because it's been solved, but because it's been shared. I want to be honest about something else too. Rubedo is not a permanent state of bliss. The spiritual marketplace loves to sell final stages as if they're arrivals, destination points where the work is done and you get to coast forever. Jung would have rejected that framing entirely. Rubedo is the most stable of the alchemical stages. Yes, the integration it represents is genuine and lasting. But you're still human. You still have difficult days. You still encounter situations that activate old patterns. Patterns you've integrated but that haven't been erased. Because that's not how the psyche works. Integration means you catch the pattern quickly, hold it with awareness, and let it move through. It doesn't mean the pattern never appears. What changes in Rubedo is your relationship to difficulty. A hard day in Rubedo is fundamentally different from a hard day in Negredo. In Negredo, difficulty feels like confirmation that you're broken, that the world is hostile, that suffering is permanent. In Rubedo, difficulty is just difficulty. It comes and it goes. You feel it fully. You respond as wisely as you can, and you return to baseline without the existential spiral. The ground beneath you has become solid enough that turbulence on the surface doesn't threaten to swallow you whole. Jung also warned about something he observed in people who'd reached this stage. The temptation to become a teacher. When you've been through the full alchemical process and arrived at genuine integration, there's a natural impulse to turn around and guide others. And in some cases, this impulse is authentic and well-placed. Some people are genuinely called to facilitate the process for others. But Jung cautioned that the impulse to teach can also be the ego's last stand, a final subtle attempt to reclaim specialness through the role of the wise guide. He advised his patients in Rubedo to sit with the impulse for a long time before acting on it, to ask whether they wanted to teach because something genuinely needed to be shared, or because the identity of teacher offered a new form of significance to replace the old ones they'd released. The ones who were truly in Rubedo could sit with that question honestly. The ones who were still in late albedo wearing Rubedo's clothing tended to rush into the role. One more thing about Rubedo that I think matters, and it circles back to the alchemical metaphor itself. The alchemists described the culmination of Rubedo as the creation of the philosopher's stone, the substance that transforms everything it touches. Jung read this psychologically as the self fully realized, the personality that has integrated its shadow, its anima or animus, its complexes, its wounds, and emerged as something genuinely whole. But here's what the alchemists also said about the philosopher's stone, and what Jung found fascinating. It looks ordinary, it doesn't glow, it doesn't announce itself. To the untrained eye, it's indistinguishable from any common rock. Its power is entirely invisible to those who don't know what they're looking at. And that, Jung believed, was the deepest truth about Rubedo. The most transformed people don't look transformed. They look ordinary. They live ordinary lives. They go to the grocery store and cook dinner and lose their keys and get frustrated in traffic. They don't levitate. They don't radiate visible light. They just carry a quiet, unshakable solidity that you can feel if you door. We paying attention and miss completely if you're looking for something more dramatic. That's the real sign of Rubedo. The drama is over. The performance of transformation is over. The need to be seen as someone who's done the work is over. What remains is a life lived from the inside out, in full color, with the fire of genuine selfhood burning steadily in the center of the chest. The reddening, the return of blood and warmth and wanting and being and creating and loving and dying. All of it held, all of it welcome, all of it finally, genuinely yours.